Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Assembly Lines Podcast. I'm Chris Torrance. In episode 110, I told you about my retro computing story, and I asked you for your stories. Many of you sent in some great stories, and I wanted to highlight some of them. So let's get started. Our first story comes from Joe Strosnider of Joe's Computer Museum.
I was born in 1980 in Ohio. When I discovered computers. We had Apple IIs in elementary school and I fell in love. But we didn't have a computer at home. But in the spring of 1986, that started to change. I don't remember the details, so I reached out to my dad to tell the story of how we got our first computer, the TRS-80 Model 1. So today, on my channel, we have Gary Strosnider, my dad, who's going to talk to us a little bit about the first computer we ever had when I was a kid, the TRS-80. So, from what I understand, Dad, we got that computer somewhere in like spring of 1986. What was the detail on that?
Yeah, as best I can remember, somewhere in that neighborhood.
Okay.
There was a kid that worked for me that had bought this thing off somebody else because he heard he could play games on it.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, what else are you going to do with a computer, right?
Right, and also at the time where I worked, we were just getting into computers at work, so he thought it'd be a good tool so he could learn how to use a keyboard and all that kind of good stuff.
Okay.
Well, then he gets this bad boy home, fires it up, and realizes he doesn't know how to use it.
To listen to more of Joe's interview with his father, click the link above or check the show notes for the URL. Our next story comes from Britt Dodd. In Britt's words, my father was an oral surgeon and ended up adopting IBM PCs for managing medical scheduling. So I was very familiar with computers in general and grew up around PCs as a young child. Unfortunately, Britt wasn't able to convince his father to buy him his own computer until one day Britt accidentally low-level formatted his father's hard drive. His father promptly took him down to the local Goodwill and bought him his own PC. Britt got back into retro computing a few years ago, and now he has a collection of Apple IIe's and Apple II GS's. For more of Britt's computer adventures, see the show notes below. Our next story comes from Ontario, Canada. When Rudy Panigas was a child, he started getting into Apple II computers and got himself an Apple II Plus clone. Later, he worked at a couple of repair stores doing Apple II repairs. When the IBM came out, a lot of stores stopped doing Apple II repairs. So Rudy opened up his own business and started doing the repairs himself. Business was great for several years, and then it started to die off as the Apple II platform faded away. Most recently, Rudy has gotten back into retro computing and has been putting his past repair skills into great use. Now he has a collection of Apple IIs and Macintoshes, and he's been able to get them all working again. He's also been repairing Commodores, and he has a collection including a VIC-20, a 64, a 64C, and a PET 4023, just like he had in high school. For the rest of Rudy's story, check the show notes below.
Going to school in kind of the early 1980s, I used to live in South Carolina, and our school had one computer in our library. One of the things that I was able to do is we had a disc for logo. So what I did is I took I think a week plus of lunches and went in there and I drew the logo for my grade school. And the librarian was really, really impressed by that. And I remember them rolling the Apple II with the big 25-inch TV, rolling that into the classroom. And I loaded up the logo program and it drew it on the screen. And everybody was kind of like, wow, that's really neat. Never should have did that, because after that, it was really hard to book time in the computer lab, just because everybody else kind of wanted to do their own fun thing. I didn't really have big expectations of having a computer at home. It was just a fun thing to have one at home. So here's what I got. the Commodore Plus 4.
Ron McAdams went on to a long IT career. When he got back into retro computers, he took a detour into PCs for a while, but then he saw the light and switched back to the Apple II. To listen to more of his story, click on the link above or look in the show notes. In Dennis Wheeler's case, his story began with repairing his grandparents' old vacuum tube TVs and radios. From there, it was several years until he acquired his first computer, the Tandy Color computer. His retro computing really took off when he discovered the book Code by Charles Petzold. Dennis decided he wanted to build his own retro computer on a breadboard. He started following the videos by Ben Eder and learning as much as possible about how to design and build his own computer. Dennis has also been working on a relay computer, and he's hoping to build a 4-bit adder from relay switches. He's also still working on his breadboard computer, and he's recently dusted off his old Coco and fired it back up again. To read more about Dennis's story, see the show notes below. Our next story takes us all the way over to Finland to Jorma Honkanen. He started out with a Spectra Video SVI 728, which was a computer that was MSX compatible. MSX was a standard developed by Microsoft and a Japanese manufacturer called ASCII, and it was designed to provide a standard for which all microcomputers could be based. The Spectra Video SVI 728 used a Z80 processor that had a clock speed of 3.56 megahertz. It came out in 1984, and it was a pretty impressive computer for the time. However, in Jorma's case, the problem was that nobody else that he knew actually had a Spectra Video. In Jorma's words, "I still can't remember why we chose to buy it and not a Commodore 64. Maybe it was the price or availability. I remember there were a few options for what brands I could buy, but I guess the Spectra Video sounded cool." Later on, Jorma realized that most of his friends actually had Commodore 64s, so he upgraded to a Commodore 128. He was happy with that for a while, but then of course computer envy got the best of him when he saw his friends playing Defender of the Crown on an Amiga 500. So then he switched over to that one. Jorma got into retro computing when some friends gave him some old computer junk. He started collecting all sorts of computers, but finally settled on just the 8-bit brands. He now has a collection of Apple IIs, Commodores, BBC Micros, Atari, and Spectrum. He also has a great blog where he documents the history of the Apple II in Finland, and I'll have the link to that in the show notes along with his full story.
Hello, this is Javier Rivera, and welcome back to my channel. A few days ago, my friend Chris Torrance from Assembly Lines podcast set up a very nice video about telling your story. So here it is, my story on how I started on the Apple II computer. This goes back years and years ago. I think it all began in a summer morning in a castle surrounded by magical animals. Oh no, wrong story. It actually began in Mexico City with a father that worked for Sperry Univac. My dad used to travel a lot to the US, and he used to bring us, me and my brother, gifts, all kinds of gifts, sometimes electronic gifts. So he brought us a Pong, and later he got us a TI-99 4A.
Click on the link above to hear Javier's stories about how his dad smuggled an Apple IIc across the border, about his love affair with Beagle Brothers software, and a really touching story about his mentor Diego, who really taught him everything about the Apple II. I wanted to thank everyone for sending in their stories. If anyone else has a story that they'd like to share, please post it in the comments below. And if you haven't subscribed to my channel, please hit the subscribe button now. I also have a Patreon, and I'll have a link in the show notes for where you can sign up for that. Once again, thanks for watching.